The Denver Broncos released their first unofficial depth chart. Is there anything that you should look into, or are we surprised about any of the selections? We're going to dive deep into that on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more every single day, all year long. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, Underdog Fantasy. Go to underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKDOWN to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Red hot Russell Wilson here once again at Broncos camp practice on Wednesday, just 48 hours before they take on the Arizona Cardinals in their preseason opener. But before we get into all the jazz about Wednesday's practice at the Centura Health Training Center, the biggest news of the day, and in the eyes of many in Broncos country, the most debated thing that we've seen all day, the Broncos released their first unofficial depth chart. And I think there are so many ways that people are poking into it, reading into it. But first, let's dive a little bit deeper into Broncos head coach Sean Payton, what he says about the depth chart and the process, and why he believes you have to write it in pencil.
Look, we got to put together a depth chart, and then we got to give it to you guys, and then I got to answer questions about why'd you put him first. And so when you track, this happens during the course of the year. When we play home games, we introduce the offense or the defense, and then it's such a multi-personnel game anymore. You know, week one, if I'm introducing the offense, maybe the fullback gets introduced. Week two or the next home game, it's defense. The next time around, you introduce the two tight ends and three receivers. And so it's not like it used to be where you just lined up in 21 and your 2 minute was in 21. And if there was a substitution, it was a big deal. You know, it's much different. And the same goes defensively. You know, and so I could have put the slash there, but you guys, I think, know it better. Those tight ends are all playing. And I think it becomes easier for you all when you start looking at the play totals, and then you see, you know, how much they're being relied upon.
Certainly writing ours in pencil as well, Cody, that our reactions, that is, right? We don't want to overreact to, and I guess unofficial, and the team's putting this out. So it's officially unofficial. I think we joked about that last year too, just the way it's described. But look, I think it gives us something to talk about, right, in Broncos country, and it allows us to play a little game, right? We were talking before the show, the initial unofficial, official depth chart, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like playing two truths and a lie, right? And maybe it's more like two lies and a truth, really. So as we look at this depth chart, specifically offensively, Cody, I think like we've been talking about all throughout training camp and what you've observed really out there at Broncos practice, there's a ton of rotating happening. Yeah, you can see guys like wide receiver Brandon Johnson, who is listed up there on the second team, right? He's in the second string among receivers. You can see that unfolding out there at practice and with what people are reporting. And there's other things, though, that kind of make you wonder on this offensive side of the ball, specifically something that we were pointing out before the show. Backup offensive tackle Cam Fleming, he's listed as the backup tackle for both left and right, when in reality, that may not be the case every single day out there at practice. So it's just something that, like I said, two lies and a truth. You're playing a little game here. You got to find those nuggets. If you've been watching every day or listening every day, monitoring Twitter every day, you can kind of pick out where the Broncos might be trying to kind of fool some people and where maybe Sean Payton's giving you some nuggets of truth.
Well, let's just say we're reacting for the first time, seeing this unofficial depth chart. In your opinion, what is a big surprise? I'll give one, but I'm also curious for yours as well. We talked about him almost every day here on the show, and that is undrafted rookie free agent running back Jaleel McLaughlin, who, I mean, if you look at him getting involved with the second team unit, third team offense as well, these guys, they're interchangeable in a sense. But if you look at the depth chart, he's listed as the fifth spot at the running back position, which to be honest with you, if you look at it, production-wise, doesn't make sense from what he's done during training camp.
Right, because the coaches have even said, I believe it was Joe Lombardi who just said yesterday, or I guess Tuesday, as the time we're recording this, he said that guy makes a play out there every single day, right? So it's one of those things, and that was a big surprise to me to see him that low. What you expect when these initial depth charts come out is a little bit of seniority, right? You don't always expect the undrafted guys who are flashing in camp to maybe be up there on the depth chart right away. You expect them to be buried on the initial one before they go out there and do something in a preseason game. What I didn't expect, though, Cody, I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin being running back 5, that was a surprise, as good of a camp as he's had. But maybe one of the biggest surprises offensively was Adam Troutman atop the depth chart at tight end over Greg Dulcich, who we had talked about the Greg Dulcich hype train, and it was chugging along as of OTAs. Kind of sounds like maybe he's had a little bit too quiet of a camp compared to what was expected. Adam Troutman, the guy the Broncos acquired in the draft night trade or the draft day trade with the New Orleans Saints, he is tight end 1 on this initial depth chart. And Sean Payton, in that quote that we heard, kind of backed that up. So I think that's one of the most interesting things to me about this initial depth chart is Troutman being tight end 1 over Greg Dulcich.
Well, I think also to your point, he's rotated. I mean, all these tight ends that they've had, whether it's Tommy Hudson, whether it is Alberto, I mean, they've all rotated in with the first, second, and third team offense. So to me, that just kind of tells me it's not like one of these any one guys are ahead. I think Troutman has had a very under the radar camp in a sense there because he's been a consistent blocking option for you in the run game, but also he's had some pass catches, across the middle of the field or vertically downfield where he's made a play against the defense, whether it's the first, second, or third team units. And Dulcich has had his moments as well where he's caught in touchdown passes in 7-on-7. But it's just that what Sean Payton said as well, it's not included in what we heard earlier, is all these tight ends, they're all rotating in. They're all playing because he wants to see as much as he can about the evaluation. I still think Dulcich and Manhertz are obviously roster locks at this point. But yeah, I think that is something to keep an eye on. In terms of some other things that maybe if you're looking at it, you're not so surprised about. You look at Marvin Mims, he's listed with the second team offense at the wide receiver position. Certainly, as he's come back from the hamstring injury, he's been doing more and more and more. Then you also factor in, too, Marquez Callaway's also been involved quite a bit with the first, second, and third team offense as well. So for me, I'm viewing it as, okay, this is where you look at the depth chart on the offensive side of the ball, at least right now, and you say, okay, there are some truths, like you mentioned, 2 truths and a lie. The reality is, I think there is more truth in the fact that all these guys are going to play. We don't know exactly what order they are. And then it's just, for Sean Payton, I wouldn't put it past him just to mess with us as well, because you know what he's going to do, and we're doing it right now. We're talking about it just because, like, all right, hey, give these guys something to talk about for a week and a half, and then we'll go into, obviously, our second preseason game and see where things are at. But I think the most intriguing part about building this offensive depth chart is that I think coming into the season before anything, before OTAs, and we imagine maybe what it would be like on paper. Now you're starting to see some bits and pieces sprinkled in there. And it's like, hey, what do I believe? What don't I believe at this point? You can see that, like, no quarterback controversy here for the Broncos. Russell Wilson's listed as QB1, and rightfully so. He's been having a red hot training camp in the last 5 days. So nothing surprises me when it comes to the depth chart. But look, we've talked about the offensive side of the ball. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the defensive depth chart and see maybe where the truths are. Where's the lie at? We'll debate that and discuss that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means with the NFL preseason starting up. It's also the official start of fantasy football drafting month, and you can get championship ready for your home league by trying out best ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft. There's no waivers. There's no trades. Underdog, they'll set your best lineup every single week. So if you're like me and you forget to set your lineup sometimes, well, Underdog takes that away. They do it for you based on the best overall projections possible. You get that at Underdog Fantasy. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. It's the largest fantasy football contest of all time, and it's back, and it's even bigger with $15 million of total prizes that are up for grabs, including an absurd amount of $3 million goes directly to the winner of the tournament. And last year, the winner drafted their team in July. So don't wait around. Get started here today. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code Locked On. It's one word, Locked On, to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On.
What kind of surprises can be found on the defensive side of the ball on the Denver Broncos' first official depth chart here as we enter the first week of the preseason for the team? The Broncos are getting ready to go to Arizona, and we're going to talk about this defensive depth chart. We're going to talk two truths and a lie, or two lies and a truth, whatever game you want to play there. But before we do that and talk about the defensive side of the ball from Cody and I, we've got to say a huge shout out and thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, available everywhere and anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. So thank you to everyone that brings us with you on your commute to work, or if you bring us on the treadmill, or while you're working out, while you're shopping for groceries, or if you're sitting on the couch watching YouTube. Thanks for being part of this family with us. We love and appreciate you, and we love to interact with all of you. So give us your reactions. What did you think about the Broncos' initial depth chart? Surprises? Anything really stand out? Something maybe that we don't talk about on the show? Drop it in the YouTube comments or hit us up on Twitter. As always, we love chatting it up with every single one of you in Broncos Country. Cody, any big surprises for you on the Denver Broncos defensive depth chart? I know we talked on offense, maybe not a ton of major surprises, but defensively, I think this is where there's a little bit more smoke and mirrors, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, when it first came out, nothing really surprised me about it. Yeah, I would say maybe the biggest surprise to me is that when you look at the safety position, there's, Justin Simmons, not a surprise there. But you look at the other spot, it's got Kareem Jackson and Caden Stearns, which is interesting when we go back to Vance Joseph's comments just a couple of days ago talking about PJ Locke, and said that, he's heavily in the mix to be their third or fourth safety, especially getting involved in some nickel and dime stuff here. And based on the trend, I would say that for me, it would be Justin Simmons, Caden Stearns, PJ Locke, really as that depth chart, if it were up to me, based on what I have seen. And maybe it is leaning that way, but maybe because, Kareem, he does have veterans days off, right? The Broncos do give him vet days off. He's had a couple so far here at the start of camp. But it's like you look at guys like PJ and you look at some of the other guys competing, it's not necessarily, they're not missing any time there, and they're having a chance to make plays. I will say that maybe J.L. Skinner and Devon Key really kind of on the back end might be the bigger surprise, but for the most part from the starters, not a surprise in my opinion. Now I want to ask you, when you saw it, the first official depth chart, were you surprised about any of the things with the starters or backups?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is defensive end Jonathan Harris in there with the starters. And I think a lot of Denver Broncos fans would love to see a Harris in the starting lineup on the defensive line. But Shelby Harris, right? Free agent defensive lineman who used to play for the Broncos, was traded to Seattle last year. Obviously, he took a visit to Denver. Well, I say visit. He lives there, right? So he took a visit to the facility, but then followed that up with a visit to Cleveland. So we don't quite know his status right now. He still remains a free agent. But Jonathan Harris, who was picked up out of Lindenwood a couple of years ago previously by the Chicago Bears. The Broncos plucked him off of the Chicago Bears practice squad, and he has really grown and developed. So he's one of those guys who we got to watch him closely in the preseason, because he's now being thrust in there as a potential starter. And it's funny, we celebrate the Cinderella stories, we celebrate the underdog stories, but it's interesting to me, Cody, Broncos Country does not seem to be unanimously excited about Jonathan Harris being in the starting lineup. He's not, for whatever reason. My perception is that he's not being given the same sort of underdog Cinderella story, rising from the ashes sort of treatment from fans, even though his story is equally as crazy as somebody like Shelby Harris from a couple years ago. So Jonathan Harris being in the starting lineup there, that is fascinating to me, and probably maybe the biggest surprise, in my opinion, on defense.
And I would say in our offseason preview before training camp even began, you and I were debating who's going to be the other starting defensive end opposite of Zach Allen. And, we thought, we mentioned Matt Henningsen quite a bit there. The thing for me, though, with Jonathan Harris, he's been so consistent. I think he's had a really terrific offseason. He's had a really good training camp. He's really just kind of been in this underrated role. But, man, he's batted passes down at the line of scrimmage. I think a lot of people forget Jonathan Harris and what he's been able to do. Shelby Harris himself even said that Jonathan Harris has the best hands on the league after, I think in Shelby's final season in Denver. But let's go to some other things as well. You still have DJ Jones, obviously an immovable object there, Zach Allen. But behind Zach Allen, you have Jordan Jackson. Behind DJ Jones, you have Tyler Lancaster, who right now, I think if you look at it, it probably makes a little bit of sense that he's getting some run there at that nose spot, but we thought we'd see a little bit more of PJ Mustipher so far. Maybe we'll see a little bit more in preseason, but once again, this is just the initial. It really doesn't mean anything because if we're talking about guys who've been impact players, you look behind Frank Clark, Randy Gregory, these guys have been rotating with the first and second units. Same thing with Jonathan Cooper and Nick Benito. These two guys have been getting a lot of time with the first team and then getting some time with the second team. So it could go either way when you talk about the rotation at edge rush. I mean, they're very deep there right now. But I would also say Justin Sternad and Drew Sanders now at the linebacker spot. It would have been initially Jonas Griffith and Drew Sanders, but obviously with Griffith going down with the season-ending injury, I like where Denver's at with a lot of their depth options. And no surprise here. I mean, even if you look at it, Riley Moss has not been able to participate, core muscle surgery, out for 4 weeks. And he's also a situation, too. I want to put it on your radar, and I want to put on Broncos fans' radars here as well. Coming back from a core muscle surgery, Sayre, there's a certain time period where you're restricted from doing any movement. You're restricted from doing certain things like heavy lifting. And so for me, if that's going to extend into the regular season, we could very well see Riley Moss start off after roster cuts happen, after they go through and trim from 90 to 53. Riley's going to make it, obviously. I could see them placing him on short-term injured reserve and then giving him that time to build up, probably till about week number 6 to get there. So that, to me, I think is something that Broncos fans need to monitor here. Do you feel any way about the cornerback position right now based on the depth chart?
Well, based on what you just said about Riley Moss, I think it's if you want to call it a nice luxury to have Jaquan McMillan. Looks like, Cody, this is one of those things that I do read into him being directly behind Pat Surtain the second. We've talked about Jaquan McMillan all offseason on this show. You've got to talk to him personally and see him out there. And really, I think if you've been following the breadcrumbs and reading the tea leaves, Jaquan McMillan being right behind PS2 on the Broncos depth chart at cornerback allows you the luxury to give Riley Moss that kind of time to recover, right? Because Riley Moss could have factored in as a potential starter if he had come out and played really well at training camp and preseason games. Now, we're obviously not going to see him. That's Damari Mathis's job. No questions asked. And Jaquan McMillan, though, he's not listed behind K'Wan Williams as a nickel. He's listed behind Pat Surtain as the number 4, if you want to call it that, cornerback, or number 3 outside corner, depending on how you look at it. That, to me, is not a mistake. It's not a, hey, we're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. That, to me, is this guy has had an amazing camp. We liked what we saw last year, and he is that good. He's going to play. So that's one of the biggest things to me as you look at the secondary. I mean, you already touched on the safety position, but you could go a little even deeper into that, saying Delarian Turner-Yell is listed over JL Skinner as of right now. We'll see how preseason games ultimately, shake out that competition there. I know we don't have it in the script too, Cody, and if you have anything to say on the DBs or the defense in general as well, feel free. I wanted to also just throw it out there too, though. Special teams, the Broncos list the kickers, right, as the slash. They put the slash in there, Elliott Fry and Brett Maher. Instead of or, yes. Remember that last year? That was good times. And Adam Schefter, don't be super shocked by it. You just never know. But, Cody, the kicker competition ongoing. Kick return and punt returner, Marvin Mims in the lineup there. So I guess he's the guy as of right now. And then there's no competition, obviously, at punter and long snapper, but just wanted to throw that in there too. Special teams, there's competition. Montreal Washington being the number 2 punt return and kick returner.
I was trying to think at first, looking at it, I was like, why is his name underlined? They underline all the rookies. So there we go. I answered my own question before I even got to ask it here. But Broncos Country, let us know if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening wherever you get your podcast, your initial thoughts on the first unofficial depth chart here for the Denver Broncos. We engage in the conversation on offense and on defense and special teams, but we're going to talk about Wednesday's practice now, as red hot Russell Wilson was on fire once again. You're going to get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast immediately after this episode of Locked On Broncos so you can get the insight as to what's going on around the NFL. Where is Kareem Hunt going to sign after leaving the Indianapolis Colts without an offer? Locked On NFL has you covered with everything you need to know leading up to preseason action on Friday. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Denver Broncos offense and Russell Wilson were red hot once again during Wednesday's practice at the Centura Health Training Center. What signs are we gathering from the Broncos offense in the last few days? Not to mention Courtland Sutton's fantastic training camp that he's put together. We'll dive deep in all that here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Real quick, just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for taking time out of your day to either listen to us wherever you get your podcasts or watching us on YouTube. One thing I like to do at night, especially before bed, I like to lay in bed, turn on my smart TV and watch some YouTube videos, watch some podcasts. So if you do that with Locked On Broncos, appreciate you so much. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content coverage, and more. Let's go through some practice news and notes here coming out of Wednesday's practice here. Now, obviously, no Mike McGlinchey, no Brandon Johnson. They're going to be out a few weeks, and Sean Payton said it was good news pertaining to McGlinchey that it's only a knee sprain. So avoiding worst case scenario there, that's obviously a good sign there. Justin Simmons still did not participate. Did not see Caden Stearns at practice. Not sure why, what was going on there. We'll find out a little bit more leading up to kickoff on Friday against the Arizona Cardinals. Aaron Patrick and Chris Manhurt still doing some injury management stuff there. But for the most part, it was a big practice for the Broncos. We talked about Mike McGlinchey missing time. Well, you go back to the depth chart, right, where it shows Cam Fleming listed as left tackle, right tackle behind Bulls and McGlinchey. It wasn't him getting reps today. It was Isaiah Prince getting reps at right tackle opposite of Garrett Bowles, and he held his own, did a very good job, and the Broncos offense was red hot, especially in the third down period, Sayre. Let me lay out the land for you. If you were in attendance, you saw exactly what had happened there, Broncos country, but Russ was perfect in the third down period from a passing standpoint. They were facing some situations, 3rd and 2. Russell Wilson found Courtland Sutton down the right sideline for a 30-yard catch with Patrick Surtain literally hand in the cookie jar in phase, and Sutton just hauled it in. A terrific play from him there. Then they had another play there, 3rd and 6. Russell Wilson found Jerry Jeudy wide open for a 20-plus yard catch and run. Nobody inside of him. We know how bad Denver was on 3rd down last year. Then there was a 3rd and 8 situation. Russ had some pressure coming. He dipped up underneath, and he ran. I'm not sure if Josie Jewell would have tackled him. There was a little bit of debate whether or not Jonathan Cooper would have sacked him or if it was Josie Jewell who tackled him about maybe 4 yards in from it. But that was from 3rd and 8. But then 3rd and 11, Russell Wilson to Courtland Sutton once again for an 11-yard pickup with Damari Mathis literally hand around the waist, coming through, trying to bring his ball side hand. Great technique by him. And Sutton's big body just boxed him out, and he held on for the first down. Man, Court looks good, man. He is cooking. He's having, I think, the best training camp of his career, and he looks like he's in a very, very good position to go off in a big way this year. If he can maintain staying healthy, he told us after practice, he changed up his routine this offseason because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and he wanted different results. And so far, he's made changes, and right now, they look like really good changes on paper.
Yeah, he looks cut out there. Why can't we all have arms like Courtland Sutton, right? You know, he looks really good. He credited, obviously, strength and conditioning coach Dan Dalrymple and gave him some kudos there for helping him change up his regimen. So shout out to the new strength and conditioning staff, I suppose, for helping him at least change something up. What you never know, Cody, when a great workout program is just going to completely alter your mindset and everything that you do. You feel better, you're more confident. So just changing something up can really affect that. But to me, here's what I hear as we've been talking through training camp. We start off with Russell Wilson in the offense, like, okay, Russ is scrambling a little bit, but other than that, the defense is winning. They're installing things. They're starting to execute better over the last week. I'd say early within the last week or so, they were starting to execute better offensively and showing some good signs, some positive progress. And we were talking about maybe the offense's best day yet. And now we've started to stack days. And what you're telling me on this 3rd down situational work here is what I'm hearing anyway, is that Russell Wilson and the offense are now gaining a lot of confidence to be completing a 30-yard pass to Courtland Sutton against PS2 in coverage, tight coverage with you only need 3 yards. You're throwing it 30 to Courtland Sutton. Russ he's got his confidence back. He's got the swagger back. I don't know if it's the announcement that he and his family made about having another baby. I don't know if he's finally starting to click. I don't know if you want to chalk it up to mojo. I don't know if you want to chalk it up to last year was a fluke. Whatever you want to say. Kyle Brandt's tears. Man, that guy's got to chill out, man. This is the first day we're recording this on Wednesday. I haven't watched Good Morning Football in a long time. I tune in one day and Kyle Brandt comes out there and says Russell Wilson sounds like he talks like he's plugged into the wall behind him. I'm like, my gosh, we can't do anything. Just like you said on yesterday's show, Cody, Russell Wilson can't do anything, win or lose, good or bad. But really, to me, gaining confidence. That's what I am hearing from what you're saying about Russell Wilson. And you love, love, love to hear about that. You love to see that. And I can't wait to see how it translates to games. But Sean Payton's offense, very good for Drew Brees, very good for Taysom Hill, very good for Teddy Bridgewater, very good for Trevor Siemian, very good for Jameis Winston. It's going to be very good for Russell Wilson, in my opinion, or maybe I'm just hoping that, but I feel like, Cody, we're trending toward a resurgence from Russ, and we're finally starting to see on-field evidence.
Well, it just goes back to what I've seen and what Russ has been doing. And Sayre, it's not Russ sitting back in the pocket holding onto the football. It's him being decisive. And look, when something's not there initially, he scrambles, he escapes pressure to try to keep things alive. We were seeing exactly in practice what Sean Payton said he's going to do, or what he would do before he was the head coach, to bring back Russell Wilson to who he was and doing the things that he was doing well in Seattle. We're seeing these things here firsthand. But another thing that we're seeing with Russ is when he is dropping back, I mean, Sayre, he's getting the ball out of his hands quickly. He's decisive, knowing where he's going with the football. If there's good coverage, that's where he scrambles and tries to create plays. That's where scramble drill comes into effect. And I tell you what, I think if the run game gets going, which you can't really get much of a gauge during practice as to how good the run game is going to be, because when you're playing another opponent, you're going to bury them physically. And I'm excited to see that a little bit on Friday. How does that mindset and that mentality carry over into a game against somebody else where it's like, hey, you don't have to worry about whether or not, you're going to beat up on this guy because he's not your teammate. You go full go. This is a full real game simulation. That's huge there. And then I think we also have to give a little bit of a shout out here to Ben DiNucci. And look, there's a thing here. We sit up there on the media tent and we watch Ben DiNucci throw the ball. He's had a very terrific under the radar camp, and he's taken calculated risks. He's thrown dimes in practice. Every time he throws downfield, we always go DiNucci. And that's the whole media people up there. They're doing the Paisan thing. It's funny. And I imagine we're going to see quite a bit of us going DiNucci in our post-game report on Friday. And look, I think he's had a good camp. Denver's going to keep 3 quarterbacks more than likely on the roster. So I think Broncos country should get used to watching a little bit, especially here in the preseason. A lot of Jarrett Stidham, a lot of Ben DiNucci. You're going to see some of Russell Wilson. Hey, but you know what, Sayre? We're just about 48, 24 hours away within that window there of there being a preseason game. And Broncos country, we're going to have you caught up all the way through what you need to know. We're going to do our game preview. That's going to come out on Friday's episode. We'll have a post-game report for you on Friday as well here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, your team, every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. But that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. Broncos country, we're always eager for your thoughts. So if you're watching on YouTube, comment down below, like the video for the algorithm, interact with other members of Broncos country. And if you're a Broncos fan and you have friends and family who are Broncos fans that don't know about Locked On Broncos, share this podcast with them. Help us grow the show even more. You make the show exactly what it is. We appreciate you so much. Sayre Bedinger, myself, we're going to be back tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show as we preview the game, our 3 keys, what we want to see as well. You're going to get that much more in tomorrow's episode of the show. Walk, don't run.